So I was a graduate student at USC in the early 1970s, and we put on a conference, and this person named Maggie Kuhn was there. I think it was in 73 or 74. And I realized that I was doing the wrong thing. I was an academic, and here was somebody who was an activist, and she really opened me up to that potential, and ruined me as an academic, which when I left the university was actually good for them and for me. But Maggie, as Carroll said, you always felt with Maggie that you were the most special person ever, and that she hung on every word, and the worst thing she would ever say is, "That's interesting," which really meant, "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life." She never made me feel bad. And I always wondered what it was. It was, why did she think so highly of me? And, my political acumen, whatever. And then I realized that I had a mustache when I first met her, to Paul's comment. And I shaved it off a few years later, and she was so upset with me. And I realized she only liked me for my mustache. But I think one of the stories that some of you may have heard about, I mean, Maggie had a lot of triumphs and a lot of challenges, including she lived and was dedicated to living in the community. She didn't want to be isolated, and of course what came with that was crime. And Maggie was mugged pretty seriously, and I think she was probably in her 80s by then, by a young black man that ran up to her on the street, knocked her down, stole her purse, and ran off. And Maggie ended up in the hospital. And this is so typical of Maggie. Maggie, the press was interested because Maggie was something of a media star, particularly in Philadelphia. And Maggie used that opportunity to talk about the injustice in society and how this person was a victim of discrimination, and so she never missed an opportunity to make a point, even when she'd been seriously accosted. Her life had been threatened. She rose above that and delivered a message. So I think that was, and I remember when she was working on the book, No Stone Unturned, the hardest thing for her was to talk about herself. It was not about her. It was about her mission. And at the same time, Maggie always had a sense of humor. My favorite line from Maggie was that we are on a mission and also a lark. Keep that in mind.
Introduce the section. How are we bringing
Well, we're going to talk a little bit about the kinds of tactics that Maggie used and that she saw in terms of social change, the spectrum of individual issues then that came up in various contexts that the organization saw from its chapters, and then the types of tools that she used to really bring those issues to the fore. The one that I'm closest to is, because she used guerrilla theater, I'm sure will be described by others. She used outrage. I have one example that I can tell, and it really sort of ties together, because the way I know her is through the law, and then personally. But we got to know each other because in 1976, I proposed to Maggie. Here they had a very active organization which was getting attention, but I felt that they needed, in some ways, the kind of sharp elbows behind the scenes, but nevertheless sharp elbows that the law and the legal advocacy could provide. So starting in 1976, the National Senior Citizens Law Center became actually the counsel to the Gray Panthers. So the organization that I was running then and running now was the actually legal counsel to the Gray Panthers, which was a very interesting role because it, again, showed Maggie that Maggie understood that you could have individual situations that come up. If they keep coming up again and again, they're the same systemic problems, how can you address them? You can address them in some of the ways that the others will talk about in terms of the guerrilla theater or drawing attention. Maggie being on Johnny Carson was worth probably millions of dollars of publicity about an issue. But when, in the end, how do you make that change? How do you take it to the next level, if you will? And for me, it was a lesson because you know, I came in to legal services, poverty. Oh, here's a line about Maggie. We were funded by OEO. How many of you remember? This room may actually know what OEO was about. Office of Economic Opportunity, which was, as you know, part of what Maggie called it the skirmish on poverty. But part of that was really understanding the role that we as lawyers could have, but being in the background. As I started to say, I came into the movement and we were part of the 60s and we were going to be out there in front. And I learned that our role, an appropriate role, was to be in the background. That Maggie was the attention getter, which is totally appropriate, and that the lawyers should be shuffling around with papers and making sure that Maggie had the arguments behind her when she needed it. When we first went to, we taught a class together at the University of Hawaii in a summer institute many years ago. I think it was in the 70s. And the first day we got there, we had a wonderful class. It was an intergenerational, multicultural class of about 90 students. And it was about community organizing. And Maggie and I were always sort of a good visual together. We were intergenerational. We really liked each other a lot. And the first day, the university came to her and said, you know, we just didn't realize how old you are. We don't think you can actually be teaching officially at the university. It was fabulous. I mean, we had, and I was doing behind the scenes, again, the analysis of the age discrimination statutes and all the other stuff. But within a day, I mean, we had these students who were, I mean, this was it, and they were out there on campus. Within 3 days, we had a meeting with the governor. She was on the front page of every Hawaii Honolulu newspaper. We were being interviewed by the media. She was. I mean, I'm sorry. She was. We were. So there's another anecdote to this. So we had all the attention in the world. We obviously changed the policy of the university. But my role was to be in the background in more ways than one. I remember the media came to we were sharing an apartment. And you had a living room, and then a kitchen, a dining room, and then we had, you know, a bedroom here in the back. But they didn't. And they couldn't figure out our relationship because I was in the kitchen, I was cooking dinner, and Maggie, you want avocado with that or whatever, and she was they were interviewing her about this issue, and they were really just trying to figure out what was going on, and she played it, of course, and they never knew. Anyway, so on a more serious note. The connection really forced us into some very important litigation with some major victories for seniors in general. But the Gray Panthers played the role of being our client. We needed a client. We played the role of being the lawyer. There were several cases that we got involved in terms of transportation litigation, which basically forced the transportation department to spend more resources on kneeling buses, several cases about nursing home reform, which ultimately changed regulations in the nursing home field. Major case, national litigation, providing a hearing and due process in the Medicare program. You know, one of the things that happens that we as advocates see, you know, you win a case in the Supreme Court or you do something, but Maggie understood that if you win a case in the Supreme Court, your mother's proud of you. But how does it really play out in the street? Does it make any difference on the street? And always, as a lawyer, as an advocate, judge yourself. She taught me, judge your success not by that you feel good that you got a regulation passed or you got a statute passed or you won a case. But what does it really mean out on the street? Does it really mean something to the people who you represent, but who we as the Gray Panthers